Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. For all of you that I don't know personally, I'd like to introduce myself. I have the pleasure of serving as the executive director for Arts Mid-Hudson. And Arts Mid-Hudson has a big history with supporting and collaborating with all of the good folks that have made the gospel music available here in the Mid-Hudson region, starting with back when Sherry Wesley was the executive director of Dutchess County Arts Council. And I know Ray Watkins has put a huge amount of energy into making this happen during these decades. So
This doesn't seem like as good a way to view it as it was.
anyway, what I'd like to say is I'm going to jump off here and let you
I can't tell.
hear
No.
about Black gospel music in the Hudson Valley. I want to especially thank Ray again for keeping everything going in this right direction. We're so proud to be able to present this again this year in 2021, and there's some very exciting things coming up. And then I also want to especially thank our arts program manager, Eleanor Levy, for all the work she's put into this. And I can't even begin to mention all of the folks that have worked on this. So I'm going to hand it off now and let the program begin. Thank you all for being here again.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, this is Ellen. I'm Eleanor Levy, the Folk Arts Program Manager. And I just have a few housekeeping things that please, when siesta begins, if you could please mute yourself so that she's the only one that we hear, that would be wonderful. She would prefer to take questions at the end, so please put your notes in the, your questions in the chat if you're afraid you'll forget them, and I will monitor them from there, or you can wait until it's time. Just a few other things. If you got your link through a friend and not through Arts Mid-Hudson directly and would like to hear more, please leave me your email in the link. If you would like to be added to our monthly newsletter, leave your email in the link. If you have suggestions for future presentations on gospel music in the Hudson Valley or any other cultural presentation you'd be interested, please leave your information in the link with your suggestion, but give me a way to contact you. So again, if you could please turn off your audio and set your video, set your view in Zoom to side by speaker, then Siesta will be highlighted. And I'm going to hand you over to Ray Watson.
Good evening, and welcome to the first of a series of Zoom webinars sponsored by the Hudson Valley Gospel Festival 2021. I'm Ray Watkins, local chair of the Hudson Valley Gospel Festival. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. For those of you that live in this beautiful Hudson Valley, I know that you'd rather be here than outside shoveling the snow. Today, we are pleased to bring you an overview of the history of gospel music in the Hudson Valley. Much like other cities across the nation, gospel music has played an important role in various communities, but too often has it not been recorded. So our committee decided that we would dig down and dig up our journey and share it with you. This time last year, our fabulous Hudson Valley Gospel Choir was putting on the final touches on what turned out to be our very first gospel festival in Poughkeepsie. Little did we know that we were faced with a once-in-a-century pandemic. But that didn't stop us from moving on. So as you can see, we won't be having one this week. We will, however, plan one for the fall. In the meantime, we will share with you through the wonderful world of technology gathering. And I'd like to thank Arts Mid-Hudson, Dutchess County Tourism, Dutchess County Government, and our hardworking community of Hudson Valley citizens for all the hard work they did in putting these programs together. So, without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about our speaker, Professor Siesta Little Quinn. She's going to be our moderator today, our instructor, our presenter. Her parents were born in the South. After her father served in the Korean War, they moved to Detroit, where he found work in the automobile capital of the world. He met and married Siesta's mom, and Siesta was the third child of 5. Although growing up during this time was hard, but they made it through it all. They always had food on the table, a roof.
Ah. Ray, I accidentally muted you. Unmute. Sorry.
So where did I leave off at?
Let me tell you about siesta.
well, isn't that something? You have to forgive me because there's so much to say about siesta. Siesta coming from Detroit actually is a music capital of itself. And but she went to McKinsey High School, and she was later able to later to enroll in Eastern Michigan University in '69 as a music major, where she was one of 6 African Americans in the whole department. College provided Siesta a chance to learn and sing all different types of classical music. While in college, she became part of a group of African Americans in the department known as First Inversion. I have a note to myself because I remember in my music days, First Inversions meant something. The disposition of a triad or 7th chord so that its 3rd is in the bass. No, you didn't want to hear about that, but anyway, college provided Siesta a chance to learn and sing all different kinds of classical music. While in college, she became a part of a group of African Americans in the department known as the First Inversions. They sang R&B, jazz, gospel, soul, and blues. It was around that time the department was just getting to the point of accepting popular music and even allowing them to sing their music on some of the programs presented in the department. The First Inversions stayed together long after everyone graduated. Siesta left the group when she moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, where she continued to sing in church choirs. She taught at a public school, and she eventually moved to Merrimack, New Hampshire, a place she described as mind-boggling. She was now living in a state whose minority population was 0.4%, but that didn't stop her. She formed where she was the only African American and incorporated Negro spirituals, gospel music. She also directed the Merrimack Choral Society. Her next stop was Poughkeepsie. And to sum it all, everything that she did in Detroit, Springfield, and Merrimack, she continued to do here in the Hudson Valley. She's a teacher, singer, student, coach, and downright wonderful human being. So please join me in welcoming Professor Siesta Little Quinn. Thank you.
Siesta, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm so grateful to be here and to share these words with you. The beginning part of my lecture was telling you just what Ray was telling you. But just to continue that, I also now, I've taught at SUNY New Paltz as a member of the Black Studies Department, and I teach classes or taught classes in Black music for over 30 years. And now I am the present director of the Voices of Unity Gospel Choir. Okay, so you may ask why I would bring the fact up that I'm from Detroit and am now living in Poughkeepsie. Well, I brought it up because the same things that were happening here were happening in Detroit as well. Poughkeepsie, New York, and Dutchess County were among the destinations between 1950 and 1970, the second half of the Great Migration. My family was from the South. My mom was from Macon. My father was from Perry, Georgia, and they traveled north. What brought my father to Detroit was the automobile industry. Well, here, what brought people or African Americans to the north from the South were places like IBM. And of course, there were the migrant workers. And with all of these big hotels that were being built at the time in the Catskills and such, they had to have someone there in order to work the hotels. So the first half of the Great Migration around 1950, there were 5,521 non-whites, not just African Americans, who lived in the Dutchess Valley or Dutchess County. In 1966, the number had jumped to almost 10,000. So we're talking a time span of like 10 years. By 1970, the African American population alone also reached 5,876, almost doubling the size of the Black population in the entire county 20 years earlier. Now, so far as the churches were concerned, there were churches that were built in the first half of the Great Migration. Some of those churches here in Poughkeepsie were Smith Street AME Zion, which was found in 1837. There was Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1891. At Beulah Baptist Church in 1933, and the Church of the Living God in 1943. Now I'm going to share with you some of the other churches in the Hudson Valley, but not necessarily in Detroit. For instance, in Beacon, there was the St. James AME Zion Church in 1844. Also in Beacon was Star Bethlehem in 1900. In Greenhaven, there was Mount Zion Baptist Church in 1902. In Salt Point, Central Baptist Church in 1919. And in Wappingers Falls, of course, there was Beulah Baptist Church in 1928. So after World War II, more Southern newcomers helped to find and build new Black churches. We call the churches that were already here, we call them the Black Orthodox churches, which means that they were using the music that was normally used in the white churches. So, but after World War II, the Southerners, as I said, helped to find or found and build new Black churches. In Poughkeepsie, there was Second Baptist Church in 1946, Church of God in Christ in 1966, Trinity Temple Adventist in 1964, and then the Holy Light Pentecostal Church in 1946. In Beacon, there was Springfield Baptist Church and church in 1946, and Church of God in Christ in 1961. The Black churches that were first established after the first phase of the Great Migration used music in their church that was used in the white churches that they had already been, or that the African Americans were attending before starting their own churches. The music was written, they were hymns, anthems. One that really pops up in my mind that I sang at my church in Detroit, Michigan, was every Sunday, we open our service up with Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, early in the morning, our sun shall rise to thee. Okay, so that was one of them, and I'm sure all of you are familiar. Familiar with that. Now there was a gospel choir in my church, but they were basically the older people, and they only got a chance to sing every 5th Sunday. So this kind of thing seemed to have been the norm in a lot of the cities that had a sizable African American population, and here in Dutchess County was no different. With so many African Americans coming north from the South, they brought with them their own style of singing, their own style of music. But it wasn't just in sacred music, it was in the non-sacred music as well. I'm often reminded of the stories that I learned about slavery in the South. And there was one story that I'd like to share with you, and that's the story of Napoleon. Wherever he went to war, he brought along with him his band, his marching band. So he was here when he kind of, I guess you can say, like, well, yeah, he lost. And so all of these band players are still in the South with no money and no way to get home. So oftentimes what they would do would sell their instruments. Now, mind you, these are Western civilization instruments. There was the trumpets and the trombones and the flutes and clarinets and and such, the instruments that you normally would find in a marching band or in a band. And they would sell these instruments to whoever would buy them. And of course, there were some African Americans that may have been able to get hold of them, but the problem was that they couldn't read music. So what did they do with the instruments? They taught themselves how to play it. And so I'd often think of Dizzy Gillespie, for instance, who was very prominent in jazz. And I've always been told that anyone that plays a trumpet, you're not supposed to blow your cheeks out. You're supposed to keep that air in, and but Dizzy Gillespie did it, and he was known for it, and he played it just as well as any of the other musicians did, but he was playing the way that he learned. And he, as I said, was very good. And so then what happened was a new sound developed from playing the instrument. The same thing with singing. There was lots of the classical music singing, but African Americans, didn't, well, they did, but they were used to just sitting and making and creating their own music, singing it their own way. And so it's this new sound that was developing. So Black Southerners settling in the North after World War II brought their music to their churches. The 1950s and 60s have been called the golden age of Black gospel music nationally. Gospel singing groups, soloists, and composers achieved a heightened level of popularity through new independence record labels like Savoy. There were television shows, the Jubilee Showcase, folk festivals, and radio. Traditional gospel music before World War II was simply a combination of the spirituals and the blues being played with instruments. The spirituals is the or was the sacred music of the African American slave. So quite naturally, if you're singing a spiritual and then all of a sudden you're adding an instrument to it, then it's going to make the sound different. Then putting the blues factor into it, it makes it even more different. There were emphasis in the real tight harmonies with call and response. Call and response is me sing, then you sing. Okay, and then in the post-war era, that style of music or singing changed from the idea of quartets, quintets, sextets. This style of gospel music featured falsetto voice, means singing not in your natural voice, ad-libs, which means making up as you go along. There was surely a lot of showmanship and true emotions in the music, all without sacrificing the harmonies of the ensemble. Star soloists at the time included Ira Tucker, Sam Cooke, and Shirley Caesar. And there was usually within the band that played with the gospel groups, there was the electric guitar, a piano, and the organ. So this special era of Black gospel music went on with the post-war civil rights movement. Lyrics supplied the spiritual inspiration for the real world Black freedom struggles and commented on racial injustices. I often think of the song Precious Lord, which was written by Thomas Dorsey, who was known as the father of gospel music, not because he created it, but because he had the knowledge to write the music down. And I must say that during this time, and my church that I went to, Carter Metropolitan CME Church in Detroit, Michigan, was a church that really did not have gospel music in the church. We sang the church of the white churches. But with this particular song, Precious Lord, not only was it a song that Thomas Dorsey wrote after the death of his wife and baby, it also became a song that became part of the civil rights movement, and with Martin Luther King, who, the day that he passed, was on the balcony of a hotel getting ready to go and speak. One of the musicians that were playing in the band that was at the church that he was going to be at, passed by him, and Martin waved at him and stuff, and he said to him, "Hey, I want you to play that Precious Lord thing. I want you to play that real good." And then it became a song affiliated with Dr. King. I'm sure you know the song. Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Touching words, just touching words, and to have meaning to so many people about so many things. And that's another thing that the music, or how the music was during this time. One of the songs that became part of the civil rights movement of the 60s, you know it. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Just so much beauty, but a song that means more than just one thing. Not only just praising God, but saying that, hey, whatever it's going on, we can get through it. We can get through it. So, Thomas Dorsey, as I said, was the father of gospel music, but I want to tell you why. He was known as the father of gospel music. Back in the 60s, when I was growing up in Detroit, gospel music, as I said, was not a music that was done in the church or in my church. And so they often called it, the Orthodox churches often called this music devil music, because it did sound like, because of this blues influence within the song, people would say that it was blues, and the blues doesn't have a place in the church. So what Thomas Dorsey, Dr. Dorsey would do, he would get a group of his singers together. At one point, even Mahalia Jackson sang with him, but then there was Willie Mae Ford Smith and Sally Martin, who performed this new music in the African-American Orthodox churches when they were allowed. And it was moving enough to some people in the Orthodox church that they would allow them to come, Dr. Dorsey and his singers, and they would sing the music, and he would end up in the back of the church after the service and would sell the music. And he earned quite a bit by doing that. But check this out. He only sold the music for 5 cents a copy. So the music would have like the words and then a couple of chords on it. So then we have the civil rights movement using the spirituals and the gospels during the marches and protest during, and there was one in particular that they did that became part of the civil rights movement in 1963, the March on Washington. And how I got over, my soul looks back and wonder how I got over. So that became a very prominent song during the civil rights movement as well. Now, as I stated, there were quite a few well-known gospel singers that were making a name for themselves during this time. And I say making a name for them, not only in name, but also they were making money. There was Shirley Caesar, Mahalia Jackson, the staple singers, Roberta Martin, and I'll be talking more about them next month during Women's History Month. But along with that, there was Ira Tucker, Sam Cooke and the Stirrers, the Dixie Hummingbirds, and of course, the Five Blind Boys of Alabama. So they were making music, they were going into the recording studio, and they were selling records, they're making records, 45, 33s, and eventually the cassettes and CDs. And so let's bring all that information back to Dutchess County, here in Poughkeepsie. The Southern African American becoming members of the African American churches, the new ones that were here in the Hudson Valley or in Poughkeepsie, they came and joined churches where they could have a little bit more freedom with the music that they were doing. So they brought a lot of this from the South to the North. The new music was also being heard on the radio stations and being recorded. So people buy the records. I remember buying records. And the way that a lot of groups here in the area would learn the music would simply be by listening to the music and telling someone, okay, you sing that part, you sing the low part, and then you just practice from singing off the record. And that's how a lot of it was learned. A lot of gospel music, period, is learned by rote, me sing, you sing kind of thing. So, but here in the Hudson Valley, Poughkeepsie, there was Willie B. Hudson. Now, Mr. Hudson was from Blythewood, South Carolina. In 1962, he initiated the Willie Hudson Gospel Train, which was an 1.5-hour Sunday evening show on the radio. It aired here in Poughkeepsie at WEOK. 10 years later, the show reported was the most listened to Black program in the Mid-Hudson Valley. The theme song for the show was Bedside of a Neighbor, first recorded by the Dixie Hummingbirds in 1962. At the annual Dutchess County Fair from 1963 to 1970, the Willie Hudson Gospel Train was featured at the Dutchess County Fair. They would come there on Sunday, the last Sunday of the fair, and they would command the stage for 4 hours. He was very well known, and organized the gospel choir at Ebenezer and many, many programs featuring gospel music. In 1977, he was honored at the Bardavon Opera Theater for services to the community. The name of the program that he was honored at was called An Appreciation Day for Willie Hudson. The evening featured many gospel ensembles, the Traveling Echoes, the Mid-Hudson Gospel Singers, the Jubilaires, and Gretchen Reed, and the Deliverance Singers. Perhaps the most premier gospel group in the Hudson Valley during this time was the Dixie Jubilaires. Now, I don't know if you know this or not. Can you see the picture? The second one from the left, I believe, his name was Alexander Watkins. Does that sound familiar? The last name, Watkins. Ray, you got something to say about that? Okay, I'm sorry. Now, this group consisted of Alexander Watkins.
That's
John,
my daddy.
the second one from the left, right?
Right.
That's Ray's father. There was Alexander Watkins, John Williams, Thomas Lawrence, and Willie Hudson. Now, Mr. Watkins was born in Bullock County, Georgia. He left home in 1938 at the age of 20. Coming to Poughkeepsie, he joined the Church of the Living God Pentecostal Church. And finding others with similar backgrounds, he started the Dixie Jubilaires at his home church. Mr. Watkins stated that, "We started out singing from 40 South Bridge Street. That's where we launched our beginning. Pentecostal church. Yeah, it was my church. That's where we had our first program on Sunday evenings at 7:00 p.m. The group broadcasted sound from WKIP, a radio station located in the garage of one of Poughkeepsie's main hotels in 1940, the Nelson House. John Kuhn was the program director of WKIP in 1950s. The Jubilaires had many invitations to sing, not only in Poughkeepsie, but in Newburgh, Kingston, Brooklyn, and New York City as well. Now, for those of you who are from the Poughkeepsie area, I want to show you something. This blew my mind. This building here is the Nelson House. It was on Market Street. Now, I didn't come to Poughkeepsie until 1984, I think it was. But I mean, just look at that. Just looks so grand. And this one, the Morgan House. Can you believe that something like that was on Main Street in Poughkeepsie? Unbelievable. So, getting back to the music though, in the interview that I read of Mr. Watkins, it made me giggle reading that he seemed to think that reading music was something wrong. They'd sing, he quote, this is a quote, they'd sing sheet music. They sang like regular songs. This is true. And as I said, being raised in a Methodist CME church in Detroit, Michigan was no different. My church had a gospel choir, as I said, that only sang every fifth Sunday. Right now, I'm telling you, from memory, I could sing for you the alto and soprano parts of the Messiah's Hallelujah chorus by heart. I know all the lines, and I know most of the tenor line as well. But gospel music was a music where you have it or you don't. In general, if you could read music, you couldn't play gospel. And if you could play gospel, you couldn't read music. That has basically changed since then, but it held true for a very long time. There was an a cappella group from Ebenezer Baptist Church named the Bridge City Quartet, who were on WKIP radio during the 1940s. Oh, there's one other thing. I'm going to take this back again and show you once again the Nelson House. At the Nelson House was where Mr. Hudson would record with, not record, but that's where he would do his radio show on Sundays in the basement of the Nelson Hotel. Little tidbits of information. I mean, I find it fascinating myself. So back to the Bridge City Quartet. They were on WKIP radio during the 1940s. There were two sets of brothers, one coming from Virginia, and one set of brothers coming from Mississippi. They were on Poughkeepsie's WKIP Friday evenings at 7:00 p.m. Now, I'm giving you this information But I remember one of the things that Ray said, and I'm repeating again, is that though these different programs were going on, the radio programs were going on, there's not many recordings. I have not found any recordings of these groups during the time. And that's really sad, because it's like we're losing something. And that's why at this point, I'm glad that I was asked to do this, and I plan on continuing it, because the things that happen here in the Poughkeepsie or in Dutchess County have been plentiful and should be written down. There should be lots of pictures and such. And if anyone has pictures and would like to share, I would love to see them. And maybe we can put together a book or something, about the Hudson Valley. I mean, this is a beautiful place that we live in, and there's a lot going on. So there was another gospel singers from Poughkeepsie. They were called the Goldenaires. Now, this was a group where Roosevelt Sadford was the founding member. He was born in Georgia. He moved to Highland at the age of 9 as a migrant worker with another family that took him in as a son. When he turned 17 in 1949, he moved to the Poughkeepsie area. He learned how to play the guitar from a guitarist that they called Red, and he was from the South as well. And Roosevelt eventually played guitar for the McClinton sisters from Holy Light Pentecostal Church. The sisters' father was the pastor of the church. Years later, after singing as the McClinton sisters, years later, the name was changed to the Rainbow Singers when a prophetess, that's a female spiritual leader or seeker or seer, named them as a reminder of the story of Noah and the flood in the Old Testament book of Genesis in the Bible, wherein Jesus placed a rainbow in the sky as a sign that he would never again destroy the world by water. They are still singing today. This is a picture of the Rainbow Singers from the 1960s. Now that takes us into the late 1960s and 70s, and so far as gospel music brought several gospel specialists to the Dutchess County area. My friends, Gretchen Reed and Marva Clark, both were trained musicians who came onto the gospel world here in Poughkeepsie. Not only were they church pianists, they also directed several community gospel choirs. The two of them were invited to perform in Europe, to perform for 10 plus years straight together, all expenses paid. Gretchen sang and Marva was the piano accompanist. Gretchen directed a gospel group from Sweden, bringing them to Poughkeepsie for a performance with one of her community choirs to sing together in a concert, and it was such a glorious affair. Now, we can't talk about gospel music in the Hudson Valley without talking about Ray Watkins. He's the son of Alexander Watkins, and has established impeccable gospel credentials accompanying several different church choirs. He was a member of Poughkeepsie's inaugural chapter of the Reverend James Cleveland Gospel Workshop and is the program director of the famed Spirit of Unity Gospel Ensemble. Now, the area gospel groups, as I said before, learned the music by listening to records or being taught by rote the music that others may have learned at the gospel workshop conventions or the Gospel Workshops of America, which was started in Chicago, Illinois by Thomas Dorsey. In my stay here in Poughkeepsie, I've grown to love being here and being with the people that God has blessed me with along the way. And the gospel groups that I have seen perform, or shouldn't say perform, but just sing from Poughkeepsie are singing strictly to spread good news. This is Thomas Dorsey's definition of the word gospel, good news. I say that because after talking with Phyllis McClinton, who was one of the Rainbow Singers, the music was being done to save souls and to bring the spirituality of the Lord to the people that they performed for. It wasn't for money. I mean, it's always nice when you get a little something along the way, but that wasn't the main reason. They sang to minister spiritually to the listeners, and because they were so into their work, they truly enjoyed it. And of course, you know, it's a lot of work. It's a very much, it was a lot of work. So with the smaller groups that may have started, they may not have lasted long, because in order to be good, you've got to practice. And if you can't practice, then you're either, you know, put out the group or you voluntarily leave, because there are other things that you have to contend with. Now, in all the places that I've lived, I've shared my love of music with my students, all different kinds of music, soul, jazz, classical, folk, gospel. I mean, I even taught gospel music in New Hampshire. So that's the beauty of what I do, and I'm never going to stop doing that. Truly, my singing and my teaching and this presentation that I just gave to you has been a labor of love. And I want to thank everybody for listening. And if you have any questions, we can open it up, Miss Eleanor.
Okay, so if you're done with the PowerPoint, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that.
Oh, wait, there was one other thing.
Oops. If you want to bring
Sorry.
it back up.
No, that's okay. I'll just say it.
So if people have questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat. Well, let me ask this question, and maybe for you and maybe for Ray. Why do you think the Hudson Valley became such an important place for gospel music? Why is it that it thrived in this area?
I feel that in any northern city, you're going to find the gospel music. I mean, it's just that it's something we do, and there was so much moving from the south to the north, and they all didn't come to Detroit. They all didn't go to Chicago. They went to all different places and such. So it's just something that we do. And myself, when I was growing up, I mostly listened to only Black music, and it was enough of it. I mean, like, I knew of some of the other groups. I'm gonna share this with you. I loved the Beatles. Growing up in the 60s, I loved the Beatles, but I could not let any of my friends that know that I was listening to the Beatles. I remember one time I even had a haircut like the Beatles. I took a bowl and placed it on my head and had my bangs down like this and such, but no one knew that I really liked the Beatles. They would have talked about me so bad. But you know what? Then the other half of the story is that that's what I was feeling, but I'm still friendly with several people that I graduated from high school with from Detroit. And she came here to my retirement, and I was sharing that story that I just shared with you with her. And she said, "Girl, what you talking about? I was listening to the Beatles too." So, it's where you are, I guess.
Well, I'll tell you, I like the Beatles after they got older, and they were great composers. But how a lot of people they brought gospel and spirituals north. It came from where they came from. It wasn't always accepted either.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
when Mahalia Jackson started singing this new thing called gospel music, she would do things that people didn't do in church. She would actually move her hips while she was singing her songs, and but she used her hips as tempo. So while she was moving her hips, that was actually the drums, So that's why she did that. But there was a lot of churches that say, "Hey, that gal don't need to be in our church."
I know.
Moving her hips like that.
Well, that's one of the things that I'll be talking about next month. And Mahalia Jackson is one of the headliners. I don't know, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to. I mean, in any help I can get, I'm grateful. Where Mahalia Jackson had a TV show on TV it must have been in the 60s, but it was only like a 15-minute show. And that was one of the things that they were saying, that she had to not move when they were recording. So anyone, like I said, have any information, or if you have any old recordings of the groups. I understand that Mahalia was here in the Hudson Valley at one time. At one point, I know she was up in the Catskills very often singing at the jazz festivals and such. She would sing with Duke Ellington. No, was it Duke or was it? I'll have to check my notes. So Yeah, Rosa Thorpe, she was disowned by the church, you know, and that happened even with a more recent group when with the Clark sisters from Detroit, where the mother of the Clark sisters, she couldn't perform with the girls anymore because they talking about, well, that was a different reason. So, and also something for you to put on your calendars is that there will be a docu-pic, is that what they call it? A docudrama on Mahalia Jackson on Lifetime in April. Biop, that's what it is.
There was a time that people like her and other well-known gospel groups, actually, they found themselves in places like the Armory on Market Street.
Mm-hmm.
And usually many of the Black churches weren't large enough to hold them. So they performed in larger venues. But yeah, Mahalia was up here in the 50s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she was here in the 50s, I believe. Don't quote me, but I thought Second Baptist might have sponsored that program.
Mm-hmm. And we know that the 5 Blind Boys of Alabama have been here several times. I remember when they were at the Bardavon, I did a pre-lecture on the women of gospel before it was like a small gathering before the actual performance started. And I did a lecture on the women of early gospel music, so.
Sorry, Evelyn.
Are there any questions? You can unmute yourself. You can put it in the chat. As you heard, oh, has Sam Cooke ever been to Poughkeepsie?
Rumor has it that he was.
I wouldn't know. Like I said, I didn't come here until 1984.
So we have Rhonda who's shaking her head no, and Ray who's like, possibly. So Rhonda, if you've got information, please unmute and share.
That's
or not.
Come on, Josephine, get out of your disguise.
Oh, Myra says that he was here in the Catskills.
Yeah.
But only after he left the Soul Stirrers. Now, I don't know if I guess I should have been more specific. When Sam Cooke first started singing, he was with a gospel group, the Soul Stirrers. And then because his voice was so wonderful that they convinced him to leave the gospel music and start singing R&B, which he did. He made more money that way.
Absolutely.
Right. You know, I'm also very interested because Peg Leg Bates had the resort up here for African Americans, and it'd be wonderful to know. And I haven't found that information yet. You know, what groups potentially came up and performed, you know, at the resort, and was it only secular music, or were there also gospel musicians? My understanding is I need to put that out to the community, because so many of people of a certain age, we'll just say, worked at the resort when they were younger. So I put this out to the community. We would love to hear more about, you know, the role that Peg Leg Bates had and the resort had in bringing music, whether it was gospel or secular, to the area.
You understand why those resorts ended up in the Catskills, right?
No.
Well, when those guys were actually entertaining, they entertained at places like the Cotton Club and places like that, and they weren't allowed to do anything but entertain or work there. So a lot of the Black patrons weren't able to go to the Cotton Club. So there was a couple of places up in the Catskills that they opened, and when I was a kid, I remember going up to Pegleg Bates's place, but where it failed was after those places were integrated. Many of the Black people that were going to those resorts started going to the Cotton Club, right? Because they could.
Yeah.
And a lot of those places actually failed because of that.
Okay, so we have a comment/question from Linda Tuttle. Some people today have gospel groups, but some young people today have gospel groups, but they have been secularized in a way that misses the whole point of what the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ is. There seems to be a disconnect. How can we better communicate that there is so much more to the music, or that it is worship and prayer?
Well, in my opinion, I think that the temptation of the dollar is so high. I mean, like, I've done some recording before, but I don't know if I could do it now in today's age. I mean, it's tough. It's real tough. It's a mean business. And I wondered that when, well, here in Poughkeepsie, we did Dream Girls as a musical one year, where my brother from Detroit, Barry Gordy, was the founder of Motown. And I couldn't believe, after investigating it and such, that a lot of things that they were told in the story of Dream Girls, which basically is supposed to be the story of the Supremes, that he was guilty of doing a lot of the things that they were doing. The drugs. I mean, what does drugs have to do with music? But and then all of the looseness, promiscuous. I mean, what does it have to do with music? I was still from the era with my first inversion where we were singing because we loved it. It's not very often you can do a jazzy 5-part harmony thing with a group. It's a lot easier with 4 than it is with 5. And so I couldn't deal with it today.
And also, if you think about secular music and gospel music is one of the only sacred musics that falls into the performing arts genre. But even Aretha Franklin, who was a gospel singer, but she made all her money singing R&B and soul music, and Al Green, they all came from gospel music backgrounds, not making money off of gospel music, and I think that's why many of them, many people have gone to the mainstream music, and every once in a while they'll go back to church, do a concert, but and the young people today, they know how the people before them got ripped off, so they're creating their own production companies today, keeping their own masters and things like that. So it's not always cut and dry about why are they taking their gospel music our gospel music and going mainstream R&B or rap or whatever music that they can make money off of. I'm not mad at them.
I just want to make sure I get her name right before. Jolanda Jansen had a question. So there's a new film out that you can watch on Amazon Prime called One Night in Miami.
Oh yeah, I've heard
That
that. Yeah.
feature, I haven't watched it yet, so I can't really, I just lost it. Hold on, speak to it. But it's on my list. But there's a conversation in it between Malcolm X and Sam Cooke, where Malcolm X is saying that Sam Cooke is sort of selling out because he's singing to please white audiences. And
Yeah.
she was wondering if you had any comment about that.
Well, yeah, it's true, but I'm not going to say anything negative against him. I mean, that's his conversation with the Lord, not mine.
I think people do like to get a piece of the action. I mean, even in our own valley, you had the great Pete Seeger, folk singer, and he's right here from Beacon, and I think he even has some sort of rights to a verse or two of "We Shall Overcome." I think he put in there, "We are not afraid" or something like that.
Mm.
And so everybody seems to be able to get a piece of something if they can. Just my opinion.
Well, yeah, and it's if I may say, if you're looking for something to do on this snowy night, watch Ma Rainey, Black Bottom, and it tells you even more of the story. And that kind of thing, this kind of thing has been happening all through history, whereas music is being stolen, the actual music is being stolen, and someone else puts their name on it. So, I mean, it's happened throughout history so far as Black music is concerned.
Absolutely. Look at Leadbelly, look at many of the blues singers, and
yeah, exactly.
Even I have to say, even as a folklorist, some of my folklore ancestors, were not always up and coming, and looking at some of those collections, how was that music collected and who was given credit and who wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a history that is unfortunate, and how do we rectify that? How do we, moving forward, how do we make sure people get their due and get their, especially in these days of self-publishing where it's harder and harder? How do people get?
Well, that's why I feel it's so crucial that we get this area's history written down. And like I said, if anybody has anything, if your parents have something, your aunts, your uncles, whoever, and you're willing to share, then we really need to write all of this down.
Right. So if you have anything, you can send it to me at elevy@artsmidhudson.org. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. And if it's photographs or paper that you are willing to share, but you don't want to give over, and we really don't have the space, I can scan it so that we have copies, and then happily we'll share those digital scans with you as well. We are working on, not just here in the Hudson Valley, but throughout the state. The folklorists, we're working on an archive so that if people have things that they want to donate, that we have a safe space for them to go. So there's things like that. Evelyn suggested that we ask the Dutchess County Fair if they have any recordings of the Hudson singers. So I will take that on and look into that, and see. see what's coming up. And it was just interesting. It was very interesting. I lived in Las Vegas for several years and had the opportunity to talk to the Prince brothers once, who were famous tap dancers, and told me that once they got to eat, I forget which hotel it was, but once they got to eat in one of the casinos in which they performed, mostly they had to perform and then leave. But the Rat Pack was there with Sammy Davis Jr. And one night only, they got to eat because the Rat Pack said that they should be able to eat. But the other stories I heard is that the west side of Las Vegas was the African-American area of town, and it was not unusual for Sammy Davis Jr. to perform on the Strip and then head over to the west side and perform at the bars up and down the west side, because they weren't allowed to come into the casinos.
Eleanor?
Yeah.
Is Robin Green still on the chat?
Robin Green, are you still on the chat?
She had a question.
Yes. Robin, go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you want to ask it directly. I don't see that she's written anything in the notes. Oh, wait. Nope, that's not a question.
Okay.
If no one has any more questions, I would like to say that Siesta is going to be interviewed on Cool Meditations Gospel Radio Ministry on WVKR 91.3 FM. On, I believe it's, she didn't say what time. I think it's this Saturday at 5:30 p.m. And that's in the chat. So two things I'll be doing tomorrow as we sort of head towards ending is I will send out a recording, and I will also I always save the chat. I will send out the chat so that y'all can see the information in that as well. As Siesta alluded to, that so the plan is the first Monday of every month, we will be presenting a different topic in gospel music. For the first 3 months, we'll focus specifically on the Hudson Valley, and then we may stay here, we may branch out depending on what people want to hear. Next month, Mahaley is going to focus on the gospel musicians who visited us in the Hudson Valley and left lasting impressions. In April, we have a wonderful interview with Ray Watkins, and he will be interviewed by one or more of the youth in our area about his life and gospel. And again, if you have any ideas or you know someone who has a topic of interest, please let me know. Again, I'll put my email right here. Or if you're interested in joining the Hudson Valley Gospel Committee, Festival Committee, we are certainly looking for new members to help us present gospel in the coming months and in the coming years. So please let me know, and I will invite you to the next Gospel Festival meeting. And I think that's it for now, unless Ray or Siesta has something.
I just want to say thank you to a few people that have been so crucial with me doing this presentation. First of all, there's Myra Armstead, there's you, Eleanor, there's Ray Watkins, Phyllis Harris, Marva Clark, Toni Musso, my daughter, and the book that I have about the Hudson Valley, which is called Poughkeepsie Halfway Up the Hudson by G. and Spence, I believe it is. And I also would like to say thank you to Robin Green. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for joining us on this wintry night. And we look forward to seeing you March 1st At the same time, we will that will be going up in the next week on out through social media, and it'll be the same way. You'll send a form to us. Thank you all.
Thank you, Siesta.
You're more than welcome.
It was great.
And I'm
You're
going to stop
wonderful.
recording.